It's 7:03 p.m. We've now opened this meeting here, and just for the record, in person, we have Doug Levine, Tom White, myself, the chair, Joshua Warnig, and online here we have Jim Grumbeck, Adam Hirsch, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Aida Jenis, and Town Council. I see Town Council. Amy, how are you? Good to see you.
Good. How are you?
Excellent. We will go into the first piece of the agenda at 7 p.m. 7:04. So we'll take public comment. Public comment not related to the hearing we're hearing tonight, but if there's other public comment, I will entertain that at this time. Do we have any public comment in the house? No. Okay. And I cannot see. Let me see the distance. We do have a hand raised. It looks like a Virginia Slut has her hand raised. Do we recognize Virginia? And Virginia, just say your name and address for the record. And
my name is Slut. I live at 40 Jeffrey Road, which is on Pelham Island.
Excellent. And if you're here to comment relative to the St. Anne's Village project, we're not going to be able to take your comment at this time. We can hear you later once we open that hearing. But if you have comments not related to the St. Anne's project, I'd be more than happy to indulge.
No, I wanted to talk about the St. Anne's project. Can you give a rough idea what time you'll be hearing comments on that?
Well, we're going to be, that's the only matter on for tonight. We're going to be opening that hearing up just shortly. And getting some updates. But when we do open for public comment, I can recognize you. I'll put you first in the queue.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, look forward to talking to you shortly.
Does that mean anything?
I'm sorry, what?
Seeing, we have some.
No, I'm sure it means something, but I don't know.
Feedback here. Who's can people just mute? Can everyone mute, please? All right, it's extremely distracting. Okay. Trying to get back to, okay. I think the next piece on the agenda is review and accept minutes. We don't have any other minutes in front of us, and we did accept the April 25th. I'll just note that for the record here. We accepted those last meeting, but we don't have the May 25th, May 30th, or June 1st meeting minutes available. We just need to get those in and heard, and so we can review and accept those as soon as possible. That'd be appreciated. Not having those, we'll move on to the topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 40 hours in advance of the meeting. If any, there are no such topics. And with that said, it being 7:06, we're going to open the 7:05 p.m. continued application by the Planning Office of Urban Affairs for a comprehensive permit filed pursuant to General Law, Chapter 40B for 60 rental units, 100% of which shall be deed restricted as affordable. This property is located at 124 the Kitchwood Road, which is in the R40 zoning district. Anticipated topics to be discussed, but not limited to traffic, parking, wetlands, stormwater. This is case number 23-09. And who do we have here that wants to be heard first on behalf of the applicant?
Hi, Hannah Quinlan Houston, Director of Real Estate from the Planning Office for Urban Affairs. I think we've got our traffic consultant on Zoom. Dan, are you there?
Yes, I am indeed. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, my name is Daniel Civita. I'm a traffic engineer with Finasson Associates. We are the traffic consultants for this project. And if I'm able to share my screen, I will just pop up some slides for our presentation. Let's see if I can do that.
Wonderful.
Everyone can see this? Yes?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I'll just give a brief overview of our rather lengthy and technical traffic study for you here tonight. And then afterwards, I would be more than happy to answer any questions that the board may have. So in general, our transportation impact assessment or traffic study TIA was prepared in accordance with MassDOT guidelines and includes a detailed assessment of not only vehicular traffic volumes, but also pedestrians and bicycles, and a review of ped and bike accommodations and public transportation services. The traffic volumes that we used in this assessment were conducted in January and February of 2023, while schools were in regular session, and were adjusted to account for seasonal fluctuations in traffic volumes consistent with MassDOT guidelines. Overall, the project will not result in a significant impact or increase on motorist delays or vehicle queuing. Acknowledging that one or more movements at the study area intersections, specifically the Route 20 at Coach Idiot Road intersection, are operating at or over capacity independent of the projects. And I'll kind of speak more to that later. And also independent of the project, that same intersection was identified to have a motor vehicle crash rate in excess of the MassDOT average crash rates for signalized intersections in this MassDOT district, which I will also get into later. We have recommendations within the traffic study as they relate to both of those last bullet points. And lines of sight at the project site driveway and the emergency access roadway to the north of the proposed building were found to exceed, or it can be made to exceed, the recommended sight lines to function in a safe manner. Here you're going to see a little graph showing the study area and the existing conditions, sidewalks, crosswalks, lane use, and dimensions. We looked at the two signalized intersections of Boston Post Road, Route 20 at Coach Idiot Road, and Old Connecticut Path, the Route 126 at Old Coach Idiot Road. Both are signalized intersections. And we also looked at the unsignalized or stop controlled existing driveway to St. Anne's Church, where all of the traffic for the project will be entering or exiting. As I said earlier, the traffic volumes we used were conducted in January and February of 2023, and in accordance with MassDOT standards, which requires that we adjust those volumes up to average month conditions. We brought them up by approximately 6% to get them to average month conditions. And with that adjustment in mind, Coach Idiot Road itself carries about 10,000 vehicles over the course of an average day, with about 1,200 to 1,300 during each of the commuter peak hours. So that is your one peak hour between 7 and 9 a.m. and your one peak hour between 4 and 6 p.m. Then getting into the trip generation of the project, how many vehicles it is expected to generate, based on data published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or the ITE, who has conducted numerous studies over many years all across the country, using specifically their land use code senior adult housing multifamily, which is the proposed use for the project. It is estimated that the project will generate about 200 vehicle trips, 194 over the course of an average day, with around 12 during the weekday morning peak hour and 15 during the weekday evening peak hour. And it is good to note that these trips are one way. So a vehicle that leaves in the morning to go to work per se and arrives home in the evening count as two trips. And then if we look at those peak hour trips, kind of if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, those really, it comes down to one new trip in the area on the roadways every 4 to 5 minutes, which is not a level of traffic that's going to be perceivable to the average person who already traverses the roadway. And if we jump back to those numbers I said relating to the existing traffic on Coach Idiot Road, with about 1,200 to 1,300 during each of those peak hours, it represents a 1 to 2% increase in traffic. So it's very minimal. And senior adult age restricted housing is when you look at a lot of land uses, it's not a very intense trip generated, as you can see here. We then took those trips generated by the project and dispersed them to the study area using the percentages you see here. A majority, about 50%, we anticipate to travel east, whether on Boston Post Road or on Old Connecticut Path to get up to Boston Post Road and head east towards Weston and Waltham towards I-95, essentially. And then we took the trips generated by the project and then added them to a no build condition. So the condition without the construction of the project, then looked at the difference at the study area intersections between those two conditions, between the no build and the build condition. And we found that the project related impacts or the impacts at the movements as experienced by cars because of the 12 to 15 trips generated by the project were found to be an increase in average motorist delay of up to 6 seconds. So that was the maximum. And as an increase in vehicle queuing of up to 1 vehicle. So just 1 extra vehicle waiting in queues wherever. As I did state previously, the northernmost, the Route 20 at Coach Idiot Road intersection is operating at or over capacity currently. And there are recommendations later that we have recommended to address that. These are the recommendations on site access and circulation. I won't bore everyone by reading them word for word, but they essentially relate to the width of the driveways, making sure fire trucks can get into and out of them without running over curbs or running over cars. Stop bars and stop signs when exiting the project sites, ADA compliant wheelchair ramps where applicable. And an important recommendation is that trees and vegetation within the site triangle areas of both the shared driveway and the emergency access driveway. So where vehicles exiting the project site would pull up and have to look left and right on Coach Idiot Road, those trees and vegetation there should be trimmed and maintained, continued to be trimmed to allow for the proper and safe sightlines. Our recommendation at the Route 20 at Coach Idiot Road intersection that addresses both the safety concerns and the capacity issues. We recommend that the applicant facilitate the completion of a road safety audit, which will then produce a variety of suggested improvements, some of them short-term, low cost, some of them high cost, long-term, that the town can then use to support state grant applications to then construct those improvements. And then the last bit of our recommendation was on a transportation demand management program. These are simple and just essentially there to try to encourage residents to not use vehicles. The main one being someone will be assigned as a point of contact with the Wayland Council on Aging. And I appreciate you for listening to my probably longer than you had hoped spiel about the traffic study. And I'll be here to answer any questions that the board may have. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody from the board have any questions before we hear from maybe our peer reviewer on this topic? No? We're not hearing from anybody on traffic in the town?
Not at this time. Well, I'm the peer reviewer, so I thought you want me to.
I have one question about the stop sign issue.
Please.
I didn't understand, was that the stop sign actual sign or a marking on the asphalt?
So we had
Or,
both, yes.
okay.
Aida.
Yeah, I have a question about, I think I was hearing that you were going to try to coordinate with the Council on Aging. Is that to provide the bus transportation? When
That
you
is,
mentioned-
yep. Sorry, were you done? I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, when you were mentioning coordinating with them and trying to reduce vehicular travel. Is that the intent?
Yes, I believe, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but the Council on Aging has some kind of on-demand pickup with buses. That's pretty common in many towns. So that would kind of be the focal point of that connection to facilitate that.
So my further question is, this is the location is halfway between Route 20 sort of and Route 30 sort of. It's and the population that is intended to be renting here is it is of the more mature age population. I don't know how on demand the COA vehicles or the transit could be, but for people to be able to really get out and about, this is not a walking area. It's sort of a biking area, but it's a place where somebody needs, immediate vehicular access if they're living alone in an apartment in an area that you have to walk a couple of miles one way or a couple of miles the other way to get to a store or anything else. How is that being considered in your study?
So I pretty much agree with everything that you had said. We did not, for the purposes of trip generation for the study, we did not reduce the amount of vehicles we would expect the project to generate, like we sometimes would say we were doing this study in Boston or someplace with more access to public transit. We took no reduction, and the TDM program, the Transportation Demand Management Program, is mainly just kind of a good faith, good transportation planning section that we try to include in all reports. Now, as you rightly pointed out, it may or may not have a large impact on this development in this area. But like I said, it's good planning to try to do it. But as for the report itself and our analysis, we took no credit for any sort of on-demand, whether it be from the Council on Aging or public transportation or lack thereof.
So what you were planning for was the maximum usage of individuals with their vehicles. So hopefully there could be a reduction if there were taxi service or something like that through the COA.
Correct.
Thank you.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I heard this at the very beginning. You said this included also look at pedestrian and biking in the area, but that the study was done in January, February. How do you account for, who's walking or biking in January, February?
So, and I don't want to get too technical here, but what it really comes down to is, especially at the signalized intersections, when we do our analysis at intersections that have crosswalks, stop walks, and a dedicated pedestrian phase like these, we do include a certain number of pedestrians that we see. And because the way that everything kind of works out behind the scenes, there's a range of pedestrians that cause the signals to operate the same way. And this is not a super high traffic area. So we did see some, not a ton, I'll give you that. We did see some pedestrian and bicycle usage. And then if we scale that towards something like the summer, we would expect the signals to operate roughly similar, just because we did include in our analysis some of the pedestrians.
I'm not sure I follow, but I would expect, people not to bike in January, February, and people to bike in June and July, but
There
I'm not
is
sure how to
some-
extrapolate that. Is it a standard that you're using, or I'm not
Yes.
sure how that works?
There's some kind of factor of safety probably isn't the right word, but there is some built-in acknowledgement that things may be higher in the summer months. Like the seasonal adjustment, MassDOT requires we adjust everything to seasonal to average month. So the same is done for pedestrians and bicycles.
And I'm not sure this issue is even a needle mover, but I would just note that, I think it is during the summer, there's a pretty good volume of people who bike down the Kitchwood Road and run down the Kitchwood Road. Which you see a couple stalwart individuals doing that in January, February.
Those are probably the ones that we picked up. What I will say kind of to that point, which was part of the report, there is something that we called shared traveled way. And that is when the lane width and shoulder width is equal to or exceeding 14 feet, which allows for a bicyclist or a pedestrian traveling in the shoulder, and that gives the vehicle enough room to kind of maneuver around them without passing into the other lane. And we did find that Cochidwe Road was along the length within the study area. They did have that shared traveled way, so that 14 feet.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Does the peer reviewer have comments as it relates to traffic?
General comments.
Okay. Would you like to be heard all at once? With peer review comments, or?
Timing is good for general comments and just to sort of give people a sense of confidence in the information that they've heard. So I've reviewed the traffic study. We have our traffic engineers reviewing all of the intricate parts of it. So reviewing their estimates for trip distribution, trip generation, just to make sure everything is as expected. But based on my review, a couple key takeaways. First of all, Vanasse Associates, very well known, very well respected consultants. So you can trust their work and trust the quality of it. Everything that they did met all the standards for a traffic impact and access study. So it's, there's a pretty strict guideline for what you have to do and how you have to do it. So you can rest assured they're not making it up. It's all done according to a standard that's very well understood and very well accepted. Other key takeaway, project is a very marginal trip generator. So, and it's located on a pretty major route with a really high volume. And that 1.5% number that the consultant referenced, the 2% is usually a threshold for a de minimis action. So if anything's less than 2% of what the existing capacity or existing volume on the roadway is, it's generally considered to be inconsequential to the operation of the intersection at large. So all things being said, I think it's a de minimis impact. They did a thorough job on the work that they did. They've also agreed to do a road safety audit on the intersection at Route 20 in Cochituate, which they're not obligated to do, but it has definite value to the town. So it serves as a basis for securing funding and other things that can help you get money to fix that intersection and make improvements there. So, in total, from my standpoint, everything looks pretty good. But again, our traffic engineers are going through it, and it'll be included in our comment letter, any other comments that we have.
Okay. And when do you expect that we'll get the comment letter?
Well, I'm hoping to do it in concert with the revised submittal coming in on the site drawings, but if I don't, we'll probably get it done the next week or so.
Okay. Okay. Good. Any questions from the board for peer review? Maybe we just open up the public comment as it relates to, well, I did make a promise to Ms. Slepp here. Ms. Slepp, are you on? We recognize you for your comment here, and then you are still with us.
Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, just repeat your name and address for the record.
Okay, my name is Virginia Slepp. I live at 40 Jeffrey Road on Pelham Island.
Welcome.
And I would just like to say that I'm 100% in favor of the St. Anne's project. I think it sounds extremely well planned and very welcoming to seniors in every respect. One of my major concerns about Mill Creek, and I haven't really heard anybody speak to this, is that I don't see how one could expect people to move into a full-priced apartment only to find that they're living in the middle of a major traffic jam every morning and every evening, and that their basement floods every few years. I can foresee a point where people would move in and discover what the situation really was and move out, and then Wayland is going to be stuck in an empty building.
I certainly appreciate those comments. I think we're talking about a different potential project for which we don't have before us today.
Right, I understand. I just want to say that I'm totally in favor of St. Anne's. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. And I think, maybe we can take some other public comment as it relates to the traffic specifically. That'd be great. I know we're starting to, anybody in the, hi, yes, if you want to just state your name and address again for the record.
Of course, David Chamoyan, 2 Windy Hill Lane here in Wayland. First, I want to say that in my business, I've used Vaness. I think their name was a little bit different, Vaness Hagen maybe, but they are a very respected traffic study, and I agree with the peer reviewer here. But I don't understand one of the first comments that was made as it relates to the Route 2027 intersection. Was indicated that that is a problem intersection, that it has a higher rate of traffic accidents, and yet you're going to add 60 more residences that could potentially access that intersection. It just seems like you're exacerbating a problem that already exists. I also didn't understand, are you indicating that these 60 units will cause 12 to 15 additional trips with these residences? That seems to be a very low number to me. And finally, I'm anticipating that there is no additional sidewalk requirement put in on the east side of Route 27. Which means that residents are going to have to cross Route 27 to access a sidewalk to walk. I think that that's going to create a safety issue for those individuals. There's already a high rate of speed up and down 27. I see it every day as I try to pull out of 27 and have to wait. And I know that's no one's concern but mine, but having to wait a significant amount of time to pull out. But there is a lot of traffic on that road. And I just think it's going to be dangerous for those residents if they're going to try to traverse up and down 27 to go wherever. How are they going to cross? Is there going to be a crosswalk there? Is there going to be a flashing light? How are we going to protect those individuals? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I don't know if it makes sense to try to take some more public comment and then if the applicant wants to address those issues all at once, or would you prefer to, point counterpoint here? Maybe get some more stuff on the table.
Doesn't necessarily matter to me. I mean, a couple of those are relatively easy for me to just respond to now. So first things first, I will talk about the intersection, the Route 20 at 27 intersection. We agree that there is an existing safety and operational issues, and that adding additional traffic to it would exacerbate said problem. So that is why we have gone forward and recommended to the applicant, and they have committed to a road safety audit to try and address some of said issues. And then one of the most common things that gets questioned is the trip generation. And I like to try to explain it this way, that we just analyze the worst case scenario during each of the peak hours. So we look at the peak hour of vehicles on the roadway and combine that with the peak hour of trips generated by the project. So that 12 to 15 vehicles that was mentioned, those are just the trips generated by the project during that 1 hour. The peak hours comprise 7 to 9. So there is still 60 minutes outside of those peak hours where the project is generating traffic. It is just less than 12 to 15 vehicles. So it could be 11 to 14. But we just analyze the worst condition so that we can say anything better than that. The roadway still works and it's still operationally sound. So those are kind of the two main quick hitting points from those comments.
Has there been any discussion about sidewalk?
There has not at this time. That's something we can look into and get back to you on. I'm trying to remember the site plan, and maybe if the site engineer or Shayna is here, they might remember better whether there was a sidewalk along the driveway. But
yeah, and is the intent to put a crosswalk? And just kind of curious, and maybe you're not the one to address that or not, and I'm looking over at Shayna.
Very early in the process, we floated it with staff, and the police department was not super excited about the idea. They thought there might be safety concerns. And so we did not explore it further.
I'm sorry, safety concerns with installing a crosswalk?
With a new sidewalk.
With a new sidewalk.
With a new sidewalk. So we did not explore further either a sidewalk or a crosswalk.
Okay. And so currently, what would be the access for those individuals? You know, the new residents, if they were trying to access the sidewalk on the other side of the street?
And currently, it is not designed.
Okay.
Currently, there is no design.
Okay. And I do see somebody online here, a Dan Skihan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, but if you could state your name and address for the record, we would recognize you.
My name is Dan Skian from 101 Pelham Island Road. Just had a couple quick comments. One, the fact is apparent to me that the town is very likely going to need to have more affordable housing. The fact that this project is 100% affordable while still having, as we just heard, a limited impact on traffic to the town, I think is a win-win. It's with an organization who has a vested interest in the town and has been working with us for some time. And my understanding as well is, as part of this project, there will be upgrades to the sewer system of the new units, but also existing as well. So from an environmental perspective, it's a win there. But I don't think we're going to find any other sort of development that we're going to foreseeably need to put in the next 10 years that's going to have this limited traffic and also cater to some of the more elderly people who need affordable units if they want to stay in this town. So I'm fully in support of this. I don't think we're going to get a better opportunity to get this many affordable units with this minimized traffic input. I just don't see how else that would be possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skian. Ms. Janice.
Hi, thank you. It's more of a statement, but then a question. And the statement is, I hope that residents who are in attendance are understanding that this board needs to do its own due diligence, and there are no judgments being made about the project when we ask questions. It's to educate ourselves and be better aware of the situation that is at hand. And that's important. We'd be really remiss if we didn't ask the questions that we're asking. With each 40B that we have considered, we've asked about sidewalks and traffic crossings, for example. And so now I'm going to go to my question. And it was asked already of the representative of the developer, whether there was a crossing that was considered or a sidewalk that is considered. If one of the goals is for these people, for the people who would be residents here, to engage in more physical activity, engage in walking to shops or whatever, it really would be an advantage to somehow explore again whether a crossing would be possible or whether a sidewalk would be possible. I mean, most of us travel this stretch frequently. It is a little neck between Five Corners and, the town building area, and traffic is quick. And so it would be prudent, if possible, to have some way for people to be crossing safely. And I don't know whether there is any need for any crossing indicators to allow people to enter or exit safely, but just take a look down at the middle school, take a look down at where Finnerty's was, where the across from the fire station in Cochituate, where the CVS is now. And there is a full signal light at the fire station and CVS. There is a different kind of signaling at the middle school, but those were all in response to incidents that happened that then caused those signaling changes to occur. So it's probably better to, I would think it would be better to rethink the intersection signaling if it could be, to make sure that it is serving residents that would be in there and the rest of the travelers on that road. That's a very quick road. There had been some years ago, there had been a woman in a vehicle who was killed on that road. And I mean, there is everywhere in town, but I was traveling around there and had heard that later in that day. So it's one of those things you remember. All right, comment done, question done.
Bill Sterling, I see your hand raised in the attendees list here. You just state your name and address for the record.
I am Bill Sterling, Morse Road in Wayland. And sorry about my voice. I have allergy season. I want to say, first of all, I want to say thank you to the zoning board for all the work you're putting in on this. I spent over 10 years on the zoning board, and I know how much work it is for you, and I appreciate you putting in all your time. I wanted to weigh in quickly on the pedestrian crosswalk suggestion. I've done a few projects that they're very expensive, but I think that when you're talking about people's lives at stake, and you're talking about people who are seniors and with disabilities in this location, I think it's certainly simpler to do that than to add a sidewalk all the way down to the intersection at 20. And there are some tremendous pedestrian crosswalk safety lights available that are flashing lights that are very effective. And I think that the developer should seriously consider it. But on the other hand, I also want to say that this country is in a tremendous housing crisis. I think the fact that this is for seniors and people with disabilities, that it'll be 100% affordable it's a home run for the town of Wayland. I think that we should definitely go for it. And I think that it has my support, and I hope that you proceed and find all the necessary, whether it's compromises or whether it's additional screening from the abutters, whatever it takes to make the abutters and the rest of the community happy with this development. I think it should go forward. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for your service on the zoning board. Yes, but I'm going to hear from John Russell in the attendee list first. John Russell, if you're here, say your name and address for the record, and we'll recognize you.
Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome.
All right. My name is John Russell. I'm at 395 Boston Post Road. And I want to say that that's a hard act to follow. He actually mentioned quite a few things that I was in favor of. I am very strong proponent of having a crosswalk there, just for the people who do have mobility, being able to access the conservation trails across the road in the old Payne estate. My support is 100% for the St. Anne's project, mostly because as I've been watching this unfold, that the developer has been willing to work with the town. And I'm afraid that if we do not work with the developers who are willing to work with us, we're going to be working with hostile developers in the future. So, you know, anything we can do to keep it in our court so that we can, you know, make sure that we craft things in town for affordable housing going forward that is going to continue to hold the integrity and the feel of the town is just super important, just for the nature and the sake of the town. That's all I have. Thank you.
Russell, thank you very much. And I now recognize you if you state your name and address for the record.
Certainly, Diane Metter, 3 Windy Hill Lane. If this is just about traffic and public safety, there's so many bikers on that road. How are we or the town going to handle just the amount of people coming flying down that road and making sure that there's an ability for safety there? There's a lot of additional, 60 units, people coming in, out, transportation. We don't have anything to provide those people from coming down those roads. And I'm just concerned from a public safety standpoint, there's so much shadowing on 27, and particularly in that area. I just like to acknowledge that and make sure that people are thinking about how, because of the traffic study was done in January and February, so there's no one out biking, and that road is really, really crowded with bikers every single day. And so, and there's like just a smidgen on 28 on both sides. So I just like to put that out there for all the developers. It's only a traffic issue. We'll get to anything else later, but it is a real safety hazard. And they're not going to stop at a crosswalk. They'll be stopping right after a green light. They go through a green light and then they'll be stopping at the thing. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, just keep it brief.
I will for sure. David Chamoyan, 2 Windy Hill Lane. To the traffic engineers, adding a crosswalk on 27, does that affect traffic flow or the timing of cars and the general traffic that goes up and down that roadway?
I would say that it would affect slightly, but not to the extent that something like a regular traffic signal would. It would cause slowdowns as people, I heard mention a rapid rectangular flashing beacon, which I think is the one down by the middle school in Cochituate. Those, you know, the pedestrians go up and they push the button and there's the flashing lights. Vehicles come up, slow down, stop. So it would introduce slowdowns, but it wouldn't all of a sudden start to cause backups along the roadway that would reach the signals or anything like that.
Just one thing from my perspective, just a word of caution. The crosswalk at the site drive is what we're talking about. It's called a mid-block crosswalk. So usually having mid-block crosswalks or crosswalks that happen in the middle of a road, not an intersection, are generally not sort of recommended because of actually the safety concerns Diane just mentioned. So ideally, a better solution would be maybe to look at, there are sidewalks at the intersection of Cochituate Road and Old Connecticut Path, and there are crosswalks there. And there's a sidewalk, I think, that extends from the aqueduct to the intersection. So maybe a couple 100 feet of sidewalk could get to that intersection from the site. That may be a better option than a mid-block crosswalk. And I'm not sure, is 27 a state controlled roadway or is that local controlled?
Local.
Because I know if it was state controlled, they probably wouldn't let you put that in.
Thank you. Any further comment relative to the traffic?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Grunberg.
I live on Winthrop Road and we have a crosswalk. We're across from the town field. It's really helpful in crossing. You've got two busy projects across the street from each other between the Payne Estates and this St. Anne's project. Whether it's a partial sidewalk or some sort of a crosswalk and possibly the flashing light and beacon. I would think that the cost is modest in terms of the improvement in public safety. I wouldn't be one to propose any specific solution, but my sense is the developer here is willing to do what is appropriate. And I think that even though the police chief expressed some reticence about a sidewalk, I think it's worth looking at the best way to accomplish this for safety, because I think we should look forward to having people going back and forth between the two projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kronberg. And I noticed that you in the front row.
Bill Grogan, President of the Planning Office for Urban Affairs. Just want to thank everyone for the comments this evening. We obviously share the safety of the residents with that in mind. And the last comment is a good segue to what I was going to say, is that we will take these comments, explore them, and explore what the best alternative and come back is with the safety of the residents in mind, whether it be potential crosswalk or sidewalk. But also wanted to consult with our traffic engineer to take into account the comments of the peer reviewer in terms of what might be the best location and way to address that. But we're obviously committed to the safety of our residents, and we'll work to respond to these comments and get back to the board.
Thank you. Thank you. And would you like to be heard?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Barbara Rutledge with 1 Lane.
Welcome.
Has anyone considered the fact that there's traffic going in and out of greenways, the street opposite St. Anne's, and how that would impact traffic flow? Because there are residents in there as well.
All right, thank you very much. Would you like to speak a little bit to the extent of your study, whether I consider?
Yeah. So we did not look at that specific intersection. We're not expected to be a huge amount of traffic coming out of there, and it's relatively close. It's about 100, probably 120 feet to the St. Anne's driveway, which is about 4 car lengths between the two driveways. So we wouldn't expect that either traffic entering or exiting Greenway, or vice versa, traffic entering or exiting St. Anne's and the project site would have a huge impact on one another.
Thank you. Any other comments relative to traffic?
It's Diane Metter again. It's just that they
Just
go.
keep it brief, but-
Yeah, it's not so much coming out. There's visitors going in to residents all the time. So that's, I think, what we're identifying as a backup to the street lights and the crosswalks. There's lots of people visiting in homes. I think that's probably what we're referring to.
Thank you. All right. Good. I think unless there's any other further comments or questions relative to that, I think that the applicant has some things to think about, and I think you've committed to coming back and providing some
Yes.
potential revisions or suggestions. Okay, wonderful. Good. So with that said, what is next on our should we talk a little bit about parking?
Sure. So my name is Steve Garvin, I'm a professional engineer from Samios Consultants. Here's a view from rendered from Chitchut Road, as we were just talking about. To look at kind of layout and parking. This parking, as currently shown, has 94 spaces, 33 of which would be dedicated towards the rectory, replacing the spaces that were there, and therefore 61, so just slightly above the 1-to-1 ratio for the residents of the St. Anne's Village. The parking is laid out such that there's a parking in an L around the building. That's about a 2% that has the accessible parking and accessible ways that would be used by any residents who needed that. And with the big slopes and grades on the site, as you work your way up, there is going to be parking on the left. That's about a 3.5 to 4% of parking. So kind of the most you'd want to see for a parking space, but there's a wall between those two in order to reduce the slope to that. And then the parking in the middle is more really, as we said, that would be what the rectory used. And even those top ones would be more to the rectory, and the lower half would be more towards dedicated towards the building itself. We've added a crosswalk in the driveway so that if someone was walking from the front entrance on Scituate Road towards the church, they'd have a space to walk across there. I think that we have been trying to respect the 30-foot buffer for the wetland. We might be able to create a little more space. We might actually lose one space depending on how we work with the peer reviewer in order to give a little bit more movement. It's a back and forth between trying to maximize the number of spaces and the number of movements you're going to have moving in and out. This parking is really a user that will know that parking. So from that perspective, you tend to have more tighter spaces we've found through the years because they understand what's going on from that perspective. But in general, the parking provides the accessible number of spaces it needs. It provides the depth for two-way traffic through there, and provides the proper amount of spaces of a 1-to-1 ratio of what we've been aiming for based on knowledge on other projects of this size that the developer has used for senior citizens and 1-bedroom units. There's one other piece just while we're here talking about the pavement around the area. As you get your way around the site and work around the back to the north, there's a driveway there that's 20 feet in width for fire access. The fire chief had asked us to provide right out and not a turnaround to Scituate Road. So that is what that is to be used for, is emergency and not traffic for parking in and out.
Questions, concerns from the board?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. Do you guys have a planned mechanism for controlling how many vehicles a residence has? Like, for example, is it part of their lease? Is it limited in some way, or is it going to be sort of catch as catch?
Hi, I'm Bill Grogan, the Planning Office for Urban Affairs. Our property manager limits it to one vehicle per household per unit. And then they typically have a tag system, sticker system, so that everyone is identified who's eligible to park within the designated parking areas. And then for anyone who's violating that, contract with tow service to remedy that.
And then what's your anticipated staff level for the facility?
So we have a on-site property manager, typically staffed with a full-time property manager, also a assistant property manager and maintenance staff as well, who will be there during
three or four.
Yeah, during normal business hours. That's correct.
And then I hadn't seen in anything so far like designated visitor spaces or anything like that. Do you plan on showing designated spaces where visitors are going to go?
Yes, we do plan on having some designation for visitor spaces. And in our experience on other comparable developments, actually the usage is, ends up being more averaging about 0.75 vehicle per unit. For example, in the project in Ashland, it runs about 0.75, 0.8 spaces per unit in actual usage, despite the fact that we have 1-to-1 availability in that project.
I think it's important to note too, there's a lot of parking there that's generally sort of rarely used in the grand scheme of things. So in terms of absorbing any unforeseen conditions, they've got a ready supply of plenty of parking. So typically your concern is set aside projects where it's just the parking that they create. then you sort of have to be hypersensitive to, well, if they don't create enough, where are those people that are there when there's nothing available, where are they gonna go? In this case, there's plenty of spillover space, so I wouldn't anticipate any problems meeting peak demands.
The spillover space, you mean because of the existing lot?
Correct, correct.
And a lot on the other side of the church if you really needed extra space. The majority of the week and even weekends that those are open.
Yeah.
So if a household has two cars, what happens to the car that would not belong there?
They're not allowed, they wouldn't be allowed to park there.
So what do they do?
They wouldn't, they'd have to find another place where they could park. They wouldn't be allowed to park there. Wouldn't be, that would be a function of the sort of the marketing process for a unit.
Yeah.
Is that there is sort of a little bit of a self-selection that if you have two vehicles, then you need to find another place somewhere else where you can have a vehicle or only have one vehicle, or else you wouldn't be able to rent at that at the apartment.
These are also one bedroom and completely affordable. So 30 and 60% of the AMI from that
So
perspective.
each unit is only for one person, you're saying?
One bedroom,
Well,
Could be a couple.
could be a couple.
so if they have two cars, let's say, each one they have car and they function, they go to work or they do.
I think that, in the situation, if they have two cars, they are not renting at this apartment complex. They wouldn't be renting here.
Okay.
Because it wouldn't be able to accommodate their needs.
Do you conceive of a scenario where the archdiocese would consider renting a space to them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility that they could. That would be between the archdiocese and and the possible unit owner in terms of where they want to do that. We haven't had those specific conversations, but that is something that we could engage with as well.
So the reason I mention that is because if the board doesn't want that kind of scenario to happen, they're concerned that the church won't have enough parking if they do that, or there might be too much of that happening. And you could condition your approval such that didn't happen. But I don't, based on the number of parking spaces that are there, I think that's actually probably a good scenario, a win-win for everybody, that it gives the archdiocese a chance to maximize the utility of what they have, but at the same time still serve their intended use.
Thank you. Mr. Building Commissioner, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I just had a question, if there would be like limited visiting hours for those extra cars, like say for, other family members to visit, say that couple, or, say their grandparents or whatever. And would that be hours limited to, during a day and only, a certain time at night, sort of like hospital hours, visiting hours type of thing, and limits it on the weekends and things of that nature?
Yes, there are limitations on no overnight visitors, so there would be expectation that no one would be staying overnight in visitor parking, or in the units themselves.
Great, thank you.
What is the age restriction on this?
62 and over.
Yeah. Just turned 55, and usually it's 55 and over. And kind of uncomfortable with the way the dialogue's going.
I have some comments, so I'm gonna, let's keep this moving. All right. Wonderful. Yes.
David Chamoy, 2 Windy Hill Lane. Just quickly, I'm having a hard time understanding the math. The addition is 90 additional spaces, but if you're using a 1-to-1, that's 60 spaces plus 60, it goes up to 63 or 64 with employees. And then there is a factor for visitors. And I don't quite understand how you're getting to 90, and I'm wondering what that factor is. And we've always felt, the Windy Hill neighbors have always felt that there is sufficient parking here, underutilized parking, and couldn't there be shared parking to reduce the amount of asphalt that's being introduced onto the site? Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I can, sorry if I was unclear, I can go through the math again. There's a lot of numbers and I speak quickly sometimes. So there were 33 parking spaces in the existing parking lot in front of the rectory. As we're pulling everything up to put in a new septic system, be able to get the grading, because the rectory is very steep from there to where this building's sited, we're going to reconfigure and repave that parking lot. So we've created 94 parking spaces. If 33 are that parking lot that was there previously, which again never filled or really is there available most of the week, 61 new spaces are being created. With there being 60 residents, that's 1-to-1 and would leave one additional being created in addition to the extra 33 that are there that are not utilized 98% of the time.
Okay, thank you. I do see a Mr. Grunewald. If you want to state your name and address for the record.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Dave Brunewald and 5 Jeffrey Road. I'm calling to ask about EV charging stations. And I would assume that there will be provision for some number of charging stations. I certainly would want us to have people who own EVs, which is going to be an increasing number as time goes on, that they would find that having an EV, that they would be supported in having charging stations provided for them.
Thank you. You want to take that on? Comment. EV charging stations?
Excuse me, we will have stations, I believe the count, Steve, correct me if I have this wrong. I believe we're intending to install 3 stations and have additional spaces that that are EV ready.
Okay. Wonderful. Any other comments?
Yep. Yeah, I got 2 things, one related to parking and.
Let's start with your name.
Sorry. Quentin Allen, 4 Windy Hill Lane.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. So on the parking, if there overflow does occur, if it's a funeral, wedding, things that happen at the church, then you've got, you know, those that live there plus guests. Is there anything that can happen on Windy Hill Lane, whether it be signs or something to prevent, you know, 20, 30 cars parking on Windy Hill? I mean, it's already a pretty narrow street and a cul-de-sac. I don't know if there's, you know, if that's something the town would be able to do or monitor or manage.
Have you experienced that in the past?
No. It doesn't happen currently. I'm just thinking, you know, going back to the gentleman's question up there, saying maybe someone does have 2 cars, even though they are maybe low income to Bill's point, but 2 functioning vehicles. Then you get guests, visitors, and on that same Saturday or Sunday, there's a funeral. Now, where do all those people park? Because they're not going to park across the street at Greenway. You know, most likely they'd be parking on Windy Hill and walking.
And I'll certainly let the applicant speak to that.
Just one request.
Yeah, we'll get to that question, but I think what I've heard is that they're not going to allow residents to come in with 2 cars. So that's part of the application process. I think that's what I've heard.
That's correct.
I've also heard that there's a potential, I think, through discussion here, that if there were such a situation, perhaps that would be a discussion directly with the Archdiocese about whether they would allow a second car to accommodate that in a one-off situation.
Right, and I think that scenario is fine. I'm just saying those one-off instances where it's like I said, they have events there, whether it's the funeral or something happens, weddings, and now you have that extra influx of people at the church.
Yeah, and maybe that's something the applicant wants to take on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not changing the number of, reducing any of the parking right now that's at the church. I think as Steve mentioned, part of this is making sure that the same number of parking spaces for the rectory, for example, remain on the church. And that's why we've been limiting this to, you know, 1 parking space per resident. My guess is that if there is an arrangement with the Archdiocese and someone to park a second car, they would have to make accommodations to relocate it at an appropriate time. Can add in there that if there is an agreement, to make sure not to relocate it onto Windy Hill Lane, but that's again a situation where you know, we're starting from the position that every resident is only allowed 1 vehicle to prevent against that type of occurrence.
And you had another question?
Yep. So secondly, I was unable to make the last meeting. It was more so about landscape and architecture. I just had a couple quick comments on that. I did attend the walk around landscape architect, also with Kua today, going through the ballooning and kind of seeing what's going to happen there. I think first, from the architecture standpoint, now seeing the balloons, whether it be from Windy Hill or the Rutledge's backyard, it does seem like, I think it's 45 feet. Is going to be the height of the building at that site, if I'm not mistaken. And if you were to look from, Windy Hill, the Rutledge's backyard property line, 75 feet is the building. There's 20 feet, I believe, for the road, and maybe another 5 feet or so off the building. It leaves about 50 feet of screening, and I don't know, looking at the length of this room, it's probably not much more than that. I mean, so I know there's talk of being able to hide mechanicals on the roof, I believe is maybe part of the facade and why it's going a little higher. But a 3-story building, is it possible to reduce the 45 feet down to 35 feet, have 3 stories at approximately 10 feet each, and then have, a little bit of covering for the mechanicals on the roof? That was the first question, or just comment and concern that I saw. Second, my in-laws started Lynch Landscape and Tree Service here in Wayland 43 years ago. And I'm the general manager, so I've been running the company for about 10 years, so fairly familiar with the landscape piece of it. In our walk around with the landscape architect, I believe there were 19 new trees that were being proposed, and sorry if some of this was already discussed last week, but there were no sizes. And so in looking at it, and then we talked, I think some verbal confirmation was at like 6 to 7 feet. I think as neighbors, we're hoping for 14 to 16 or 12 to 14, just much larger in size and scope. So again, as the board, as we go through this, I just want to point that stuff out. I know we'll have more meetings, but unfortunately, because I missed last week, wanted to point that out.
We will typically recommend to that very point, that before you issue a decision, that kind of information is either in the decision or it's on the plan.
Okay.
So a full plant list. The understanding is that plant list, things may shift around on the site, but the stock that they're starting with should be understood clearly between the board and the.
Right. And it makes sense, we had a good conversation and she said, with so many changes, we don't want to get, all these specifics in there only to change, which makes sense, but at least to your point, like have something in writing as we go through this process.
Right.
So
but for example, if the plan says they're planning on putting 6 3-inch oaks in. Well, then, you know what, then you're gonna have a plan that either says that they're gonna have 6 3-inch oaks that the landscape architect's gonna be able to move around. And you're getting exactly the tree density and the level of finish that they had communicated to you. So it's pretty easy way to sort of make sure that people follow through with their commitments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yes.
Barbara Rutledge, 1 Windy Hill Lane. Would it be possible to move the building further south by about 25 feet, additional feet?
I think we have been kind of touched on this last time. I don't know if the applicant wants to respond to that comment at this time.
I mean, this is, and so again, Steve Garvin, engineer from Seniors Consultants. This is regarding parking. We will talk about grading. So grading does affect that. We've really pushed, and this is one of the things we actually got asked. We were at the Board of Health this week on Tuesday evening, and they asked if we could move the building 30 feet further to the north to not have to ask for waivers for having the septic system spacing down to Title V for the reserve area between. It still meets Title V, but the town of Wayland wants 10 feet. We said we couldn't get to 10 feet if we moved it 30 feet, but we actually have maximized how far we move it away. 75 feet is 3 times the setback that's required. And then as I think there's walls as we're stepping, there's a big jump in elevation between the rectory and the building. So the tighter you get, the steeper that slope. We've really got maximum slopes. So these driveways and parking areas and a lot of big stepped walls to accommodate the location as is. If anything, it would ease everything to move it the other way, but we're really trying to move it as far as possible. I think I can't imagine us moving it another foot, to be fair.
And just one thing to consider, if the building were to shift, then that would mean the parking and all the activity associated with that parking would move to the other side of the building. And I can tell you from experience, the folks on Windy Hill are probably gonna have more issues with activity and parking in the front of the building operations being over there than they would with a building that has kind of a static edge on that edge. But just something to consider, that sometimes having a building closer to you is less intrusive than having parking closer.
Thank you. All right, any other comments, questions, discussion relative to the parking? Seeing none online or in person, How about we move on to wetlands?
Next sheet. Yeah. So this shows existing conditions. We can start there. So you can see the 100-foot buffer is that blue line that works its way through at a farther distance of showing the wetlands that starts from the north there. There are two wetland series, one that's further to the north with a 100-foot buffer that works its way into the Wendy Hill development, and then one to the south that gets its way to where you start to reach with the MWRA easement all the way to the south. Really, those are the two kind of corners of the wetland system itself. The 100-foot buffer, as stated, is shown on there. You can see where it jumps into the site. It goes across the back of the driveway behind the church. If we go to the stormwater, it might be a good one to show on. So here you can see the 100-foot buffer just clips into the proposed building and a portion of the parking on the right. The septic system is going to be shifted out of the 100-foot buffer. With, again, a lot of moving parts. We want to make sure, again, we just have finalized the second set of wetland observations to meet the Concom's requirements. So that's one of the things this line we believe is now steady. We're going to be submitting that to conservation when we do our filing, but we weren't sure which way it was moving. Most of the project is staying out of the 30-foot no touch. That is the bylaw. There are some areas where the peer reviewers suggested maybe we try to move a little bit in with a wall that really will still protect the wetland, but maybe give a little more space for some of the other things. We're trying to deal with the limited space for the site as the building moves close between the church and the rectory. We end up with that kind of triangle of area between everything. The stormwater is controlled in such a way that you will have water quality better condition than currently out there, meeting the stormwater management policy. You will not have an increase in the peak rates to the wetlands for all the required storm events. And really, for the most part, what you're going to end up having, which is really what you want in those 25 and 30-foot buffers, is because of the walls and the use, you're going to have area that won't be mowed. Lawn and mowing is something that you typically, the Conservation Commission really looks to limit in 100-foot buffer, and especially the 25 and 30. They usually have people put no touch on that so that you don't have lawn and lawn clippings working their way towards the wetlands. So that's one of the things that this design works well in keeping. Everything is, for the most part, when you start seeing where the lawn area is behind the rectory or even the courtyards well outside the 100-foot buffer, for the most part, screened by the building itself.
Question, comments from the board?
This is something where you're gonna have a report for us, right? Or some type of memo?
Yes, and just sort of to remind folks, we reviewed the original submittal, identified some sort of major things that needed to be addressed that we suggested they address and revise, resubmit, and then we'll issue a formal comment letter on that, rather than issue a formal comment letter on a bunch of things that we know are going to change.
Yeah.
What you see here is a second iteration. So a change in the design responsive to our initial general comments. So this hasn't yet made it to paper and been submitted to the board, as far as I know. But it's gone a long way in addressing sort of major points that we brought up in the beginning. Just so you can, all that sort of magenta purple color and all that green color, those are infiltration systems. Those are places where water is going into the ground. And it might look like they're spread out, but they're really at the minimum separation distance required from each other and from walls and building foundations. So it might look like there's plenty of space, but in reality, the designer is working in a very constrained site. So Steve mentioned, our request that they actually consider maybe an encroachment in certain areas into the 30-foot. in an effort to create some more operational flexibility on the site, they're still gonna have en masse more than 30-foot total undisturbed area around the wetland if you took, if you consider all the areas that are more than 30 feet. So I think even if they encroached a little bit into that 30-foot no-touch zone, you're still gonna be satisfying the sort of the intent of the requirement while providing some really important operational flexibility at the site.
What do you mean by operational flexibility?
So, for example, the parking that's along the wetland side of the building, they have a wall right behind the face of curb. So very little room for the wall, very little room for the guardrail that needs to be protected there. Very little room for snow removal, very little room for just traffic in general. It's just very constrained, and the ability to have even 3 more feet there, you know, operationally and just from a livability standpoint, is sort of fundamental. Losing 3 feet to having 27 feet no disturb zone to the wetland versus 30 feet. I really don't think the ecosystem's gonna understand that. I know nobody in the facility is gonna ever notice that in the future. They absolutely will notice every day not having that 3 feet between the edge of curb and the base of guardrail, or the edge of curb and the back wall. So just it's one of the balancing things that we have to do as part of these projects, is just figure out, you know, how do we strike a good balance between all the different agendas and all the different sort of needs and wants.
Do we have an anticipation of when the revised plans and submissions will be?
Early next week. We wanted to get through this meeting and hear all the input on stormwater and wetlands. And as we've made some changes to understand where this is going, we want the full feedback, and especially from the board, of what the board would like to see. And I think we're very close. The calculations are in place, but if something changes, we will adjust. And I'd say somewhere on Tuesday, Wednesday next week is when we plan to submit to the peer reviewer too, who need to go through this.
Excellent. And I would just echo your comments there. I think the balance and striking that right balance between the needs is absolutely going to be critical, you know, and certainly in my eyes, you know, we're going forward here.
Just, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, please.
And just so everybody understands, there's a ton of work and data and number crunching that goes into every line that you see on that plan. So in fairness to the applicant, what we want them to do is only have to do that as few times as they have to, right? Don't redo it and then every subsequent change have to redo it again. So what we're hoping is that they get almost all the way there with their design, so that we only have to go through all that exhaustive effort of the detailed design once or twice more.
Yes, I mean, the only comment I would have is, and I think you summarized it really well. My perception of looking at the site plan was things were as tight as they conceivably could be. And I think the design, especially when it comes to, you know, where the retaining wall is in the back, where the guardrail is, I would also be in favor of coming up with the right operational flexibility there and kind of building in a little more tolerance to make that, I think, a better design. Because I again can appreciate the constraints on the site with respect to the grading, maintaining the access around the side of the building. So it's an enormous amount of work that does go into how that balancing act is taken care of. So, but I do think some of those minor tweaks would probably benefit you, and I can appreciate the sequence in which this work's being done.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, sir.
John Rutledge, 1 Windy Hill Lane.
Welcome.
Concerning the wetlands, constrained site is absolutely a correct term. And we're concerned because we have a septic tank that took over 1.5 years for the town to approve the field because of the high water table. And being a wetland area just to the east of us and to the east of the project, we're concerned that any kind of installed septic field in the area has the potential of raising the water table, of creating a problem, a wetlands problem, and maybe even a septic problem for us. And this should be concerned. So I really do not like to hear terms like not observing the 30-foot buffer required. I think that should be absolutely strictly enforced no matter what, for the purity and safety of the water in the area. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if there's Any comment or response, that you might have as relative to?
You know, I think
affect the
obviously
water
there's
table?
the proximity of disturbance within 30 feet of the wetland is not going to change any effect on what happens to the water table or not. If we do add another 18 inches of pavement, we're going to have to ensure that that's treated the proper way, but that would be in the calculations. That's not going to affect recharge or anything of that nature. Where the gentleman has perhaps high groundwater on his property. This property is blessed with having great soils and great separation. We dug down 14, 15 feet without hitting groundwater. The septic system for the church, which is further down, kind of outside where that parking area is now, is from 1962. And even there, they had good sand and got down 7 or 8 feet without hitting water table. So historically, this site has no issue with separation. There's no concern of any mounding or anything where there was such a distance from any neighbors, we would not affect that. The wetland itself is typically not necessarily connected to groundwater, but more of a superficial water based on the hydric soils. Sometimes it's fed, but it needs to have the soils much more from runoff, I'd say, than what's coming below grade. So there wouldn't be an effect. That's why the Wetlands Protection Act actually encourages you to infiltrate and recharge more water into the ground as opposed to taking it away.
Thank you. Yes.
Andrea Chamoyan to Windy Hill Lane.
Welcome.
Thank you. Instead of encroaching into the wetlands, why don't they just eliminate one row of parking at the end of the parking garage? And that will give them enough space for doing whatever, because they still have 30 parking spaces behind the rectory. So 90 some odd spaces should be enough, or maybe 89 or 88 should be enough.
Thank you.
Is that possible?
So we don't have a parking garage, but the building, I guess, from that perspective is one of the questions, the number of parking spaces. We're not encroaching any wetlands, and maybe to be clear about that, I'm just going to finish what I'm saying through the chair, is that the encroachment is within a 30-foot local buffer. There's nothing on the state level that talks to 30 feet. A lot of towns have 25, 20, some have none. The state has had none. The peer reviewer is asking, in his opinion, that going another few feet, creating in just the tightest spots, maybe 27 feet, but the majority of the site having much more than an average of a 30-foot buffer, that really will be untouched and protected by a retaining wall, really, in his opinion, will have no effect. We've kept it where I think in a few spaces we pushed to 29. We're looking to make sure that, again, there's that balance there. Removing units from the building will not really change or affect that. It's going to probably more shorten the building, but 60 is the number we've been working through all.
And I think her comment was also relative to the parking, removing one row of parking.
So the parking is all along that back, and that's the area we're trying to create. That's a good number of spaces. I think there's 16 or 17 there. You remove a whole tray of parking in order to pull that out.
And if I may, I think we've been, trying to balance the need between having the minimum amount of parking we think is necessary for the feasibility of the project and, versus, minimizing impacts. And I think where we've arrived right now, those are 61 spaces for the building is what we think is necessary.
I believe we've heard neighbors have concerns about us removing too many spaces and having big events encroach into Windy Hill with parking. I think that's something else to consider.
There's multiple concerns, I think, right?
That's right. And it is a balance, and that's where I think the board and your peer reviewer can help you.
Yes, we'll hear from the peer reviewer in 1 second, but I think one thing that I did hear the applicant talk about, and I think it's important, it was not the encroachment necessarily. Thank you, Siri.
Siri doesn't understand what you're saying.
Doesn't understand me.
Never understands me.
Neither does my wife. But I think what I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not so much encroachment on wetlands, it's encroachment on buffer. And different localities and jurisdictions have different buffers. And I think, did I hear correctly? You said the state does not have a specific buffer?
There's
requirement?
none. There's any work in a 100-foot buffer, you have to file but there's not a no touch or no disturb at the state level.
So the 30-foot buffer is a Wayland.
It's a 30-foot no touch, right? So that's what you're looking at in Wayland.
So
Exclusive to Wayland regulations.
yeah, and I think that's what I was kind of just underscoring, you know, because I think the concern that you have, I just want to make sure you understand the difference between the actual wetlands and then the buffer that the local jurisdiction might be, you know, regulating. Obviously, all these concerns we take into account, you know, and I think it's the balancing of the equities. I think that both the applicant and our third party independent reviewer that the town has hired to make sure, you know, that we're keeping the applicant honest here, in balancing those equities. So, and I know Mr. Peer Review, you want to see her,
Sean.
Just
one quick thing. So what I sort of rail against as a civil engineer is wasted pavement space. So in this case, we have a 20-foot paved aisle that's going to have to be around the building. To not park off of that aisle is a waste of pavement. So what I would hate to see is us lose those parking spaces that are off of that aisle along that side of the building, because otherwise it's another 150 feet of, in my mind, just very low utilized paved area that doesn't serve a larger benefit. So
if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is by taking advantage of that pavement off of existing pavement that's going to have to be there,
right,
you're actually reducing the amount of pervious material.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Impervious. Okay. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to underscore.
I understood you. I'm like, sorry.
Okay. And I believe, yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm Larry Metter from 3 Windy Hill Lane. Welcome. I'd just like to raise some issues that we've been taking a fairly careful look at over the past 4 or 5 months since we've known that this project was moving forward. This is an environmentally sensitive area. There are 3 streams that we know of. There's a large 2.5 acre pond. There's also, by US EPA definition, a vernal pool in the area. Very, very close to the right side of that chart, the middle right side of that chart. We think it would be worthwhile to do an environmental impact assessment by an organization that has some expertise in that area. For instance, if this construction interfered with any of the 3 streams that currently feed into Morgan's Brook, which is the 2.5 acre pond that I alluded to, that could dry up, and there's a lot of wildlife there, birds and amphibians, and I won't bore you with a long list, but there's a lot of different things that live there. It also feeds into the Assabet, the Concord, and the Sudbury River area. So it's part of a much larger environmental domain that we think is worth protecting. And we have, I can assure you, I am not going to go through our 26-page report that some of you may have already seen, but we've collected this information over the past several months out of concern that this construction activity could have a very adverse effect on not only the immediate area, but also the downstream areas. So sort of second and third order effects. So that's our concern. We like to have some kind of formal environmental assessment. But, you know, we've got vernal pools, which are supposed to be very valuable from an environmental perspective. And we got one vernal pool that satisfies that definition by U.S. Environmental Protection Agency purposes. And I mentioned the large ponds, the 3 streams. if those are interfered with by this construction project, it could have very adverse environmental impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. We're still waiting for comments from Conservation Commission, I believe. Now, I think we've talked about this a couple times, and Mrs. Quizwell, perhaps I'll call on council, but our process doesn't necessarily wait for Concom, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so this could be, conditioned upon, potential requirements from Concom, and then those issues will be taken up later.
Yes, we usually one of the conditions in the actual comprehensive permit is that all of the conditions in the order of conditions issued by the Conservation Commission is incorporated into your decision.
Right. And so I just wanted to kind of tease that out just for, everyone's expectations that the zoning board process isn't necessarily going to wait for Concom. Concom often comes after what we do here. And as town council was just saying, those comments and requirements from the Conservation Commission would be incorporated by reference into this decision and be part of that decision, but not necessarily happens first. And yes, Sean.
Yeah, if I could add, the septic system guidelines, the Title V regulations, the Massachusetts stormwater guidelines were both specifically developed for protecting resource areas and groundwater and things like that. So what we do is assess the project and its ability to comply with those regulations. So the reason the septic design changed was because we noticed in the prior design, it didn't comply with Title V requirements. So we said, you need to fix this. There were certain aspects of it that didn't comply with the Massachusetts stormwater guidelines. So you need to fix this. That is all to address your concerns. So the very reason the Wetlands Protection Act exists is to protect ecological resources like this. There are strict performance standards in that regulation that the Conservation Commission will absolutely adjudicate. What we do is sort of look ahead to what the issues they're going to look at and make sure that the design you're seeing is capable of complying with those regulations. Same applies with the stormwater standards. So not a decade ago, they came up with standards because they recognized that stormwater had one of the biggest impacts on wetlands that was out there. So they came up with strict guidelines and very prescriptive measures you had to do to make sure that your management of stormwater from your site, both during construction and after construction, are properly managed to mitigate any impacts to adjacent groundwater or surface water. So
do you anticipate a separate independent environmental impact assessment being recommended?
I wouldn't know what to scope for that, because if we were to do it, it would say, in order to ensure that you don't have any impacts, you need to comply with applicable regulations.
Right,
So
which
those
already evaluated.
Right, so those are the vehicles by which you evaluate whether they're doing the proper course of action. And keep in mind that the 30-foot is a good example. The 30-foot protected zone by your local bylaw is above and beyond what the state views as being required to protect the resource area. So all of their measures anticipate work all the way up to the edge of the resource area, being the edge of bordering vegetated wetland. So their ability to provide even anything above or approximating 30 feet is well beyond the sort of the state evaluation of what's required. So I don't want people to get the impression that there isn't we aren't looking at these exact issues. Those issues are foundational to all the regulations that we use and apply.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's important context, especially for the public at large to understand the process and what they can expect for the session.
And it's far more involved than anybody in this room except perhaps Steve cares to think about it. I mean, it is very prescriptive and very detailed, but going down to like evaluating soils for how fast water goes into the ground, how much surface area is required for the wastewater that you generate, how long does it take to treat it, how long does it take to treat it anaerobically versus aerobically. So it's really, really exhaustive. I don't want anybody to think that it's not it's sort of given just a brief look. It's very, very thorough.
Thank you for that. All right, do I see any more hands here? No. I do think, Ms. Plum, I will recognize you, just your name and address for the record. How are you, Carol?
Good evening. Hi, Carol Plum, 17 Bald Rock Road. And I have two, I guess, observations because I don't have much hope for anything changing. One is, having listened to several of the meetings, I've heard from the number of people that would be using the septic system at the church between 260 and then I heard 180. And I'm just actually hoping you guys could find out what the actual, or state the actual number. And I do this from the point of view of I don't know if the rules for the septic apply differently if you just have a church because it's intermittent, or if it still uses the 110 gallons per day kind of thing. Because I realize this is sort of my long-term view of the world, but if you went to the municipal vulnerability preparedness for Massachusetts, one of the things they said is when they need to move people, they're going to move them, in case Boston goes underwater or Cape Cod, they're planning on moving them out here. And since churches tend to accept refugees, is there a difference if you're having your regular church attendees, or if you suddenly end up with actually having a whole lot of people that you're taking care of down the line that have to handle on that septic system? I realize it's not going to make any difference to your decision probably, but it would be nice to know just in the long term that somebody thought about it. And the other thing is, this is all involved with the paving over the septic system. I will be very interested to see what conservation comes back, but I know this isn't going to make a difference, but I just would like to make all of you feel really bad because the science has not kept up with regulations. I mean, the regulations have not kept up with science, and you need at least a minimum 100 feet of buffer around a vernal pool for the upland forest, for the animals to actually be able to survive. And the whole point of a vernal pool is that it is the bottom of the food chain. And in a very short period of time between March and say like June, all of the decomposition and returning of nutrients back into the whole system takes place right then. And if anything goes wrong during that time, you can still build right up to that 30-foot buffer. But if you kill everything off, you're going to have the equivalent of having a palm tree plantation, or when they put the pine trees back in, the forest will still be there, but it's dead. So this is just me complaining that everything is protected here, the properties, the people, the parking spaces, but look what's getting the short shift. So sorry, just had to say it out loud. Not happy about it, but can't do anything. And like I said, that the laws really have not caught up to what we know. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plum. Any other comment?
I think the one thing maybe to just address Ms. Plum had a question about the flow coming off of a church. So a church is 3 gallons per day per participant, right? So you have to size it based on the number of seats in the church, and that's what's going to be sized is 3 gallons per day of the maximum amount in there. No provision for emergency or anything else from that perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, if something were to happen like she describes, that would be sort of an outside the expected operation that would have to be administered by the Board of Health and by the building inspector. Okay. You wouldn't expect, if you started housing refugees or something like that at that facility, you'd have to come up with a specific solution to solve that issue. And it might mean portable facilities or something like that. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that the septic system would be able to accommodate a live-in population at a church. So it would have to be a solution for the particular need.
Thank you.
Yes, David Chamoy, Windy Hill Lane. Just a quick question. Is it allowable to move treated snow from a roadway into a buffer and or wetlands area?
I'm not sure I really understand.
I mean, if they salt that parking lot,
okay,
can you push that snow into the buffer and or wetlands area?
You are, according to state policy, you are not allowed to push snow into a wetland.
Okay.
The buffer zone, the 30-foot buffer zone is only, again, a locally regulated area. So I'm not sure whether Wayland has regulations related to that. But I would imagine there's a prohibition for that as well.
So what would they do with the snow?
Well, the 100-foot buffer is perfectly allowable, and the majority of the site is outside of the 100-foot buffer. We would, when we go to conservation, and I'll speak to the chair, when we go to conservation, they're going to definitely ask us to show snow storage, and we will illustrate where snow storage will be outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. And one of the things that Mr. Peer Review has been saying.
I will be asking you as part of this
Absolutely.
process to get where snow's gonna go.
So Mr. Peer Review is also saying, let's give a little more space. That's going to allow the plows to have more areas to be able to control what's going on and not really pushing it maybe where it might, some of it might spill over. The more area it is, the easier it is to control from that perspective.
And we will absolutely ask them to designate areas of snow storage on their site. And most likely it'll be in the rear portion of the existing parking lot for the church. And that's a reasonable expectation, gives them plenty of space. If they need to move it for any of the large events.
The courtyard would be an area we would expect, truthfully, for the area coming off, as an example, off of the fire lane, right? That'd be a great place for that.
Exactly.
Well outside and yeah.
So that, I don't sense a lack of available space, but it is important that they designate it so that everybody understands this is the plan. Because if it doesn't get planned, it will end up in the wetland and it will end up creating an issue that becomes an enforcement concern, enforcement issue for the town that would have been better off dealt with if we just planned a little better. So in this case, we will make sure that the plans you approve have snow storage areas dedicated and appropriately sized for the amount that's going to be generated.
Thank you. Thank you. Other comments, questions, concerns? All right, I know we've talked a lot about the wetlands, and I think we started to touch on this, but is there anything additional we need to talk about with stormwater?
Again, I think we've gone through stormwater. We're going to meet the stormwater regulations for both water quality and water quantity. Those are two big things. And as Sean said, there's a number of metrics that we're required to hit, and the state has set certain standards. So they've done a number of testing through the years to illustrate that this type of a BMP or best management practice, like a catch basin with a certain sump and a hood, will remove this amount of suspended solids, that you get this much credit for a detention base or an infiltration system. One of the things we're going to do here is ensure that we're pre-treating before we even infiltrate, so that you're also, in addition to helping the water quality, you're helping actually protect and lengthen the lifespan and capacity of the septic, of the infiltration systems themselves.
Excellent. I don't know if there's any further comments, questions on stormwater.
One quick thing to note too, as part of their approval with Conservation Commission, they're going to be required as part of their compliance with the stormwater standards is to provide what's called a long-term operation and maintenance plan. So along with all this great design and work in constructing these systems, it's as equally important to maintain them. And they'll have to come and provide a plan that talks about every element of the stormwater system and what needs to be done every year to maintain that system so that it operates the way it's supposed to forever. And then the board can condition them to provide a report every year or some other mechanism to make sure that they're following those commitments.
Great, thank you. And I think that those were the intended topics for tonight, but I did have a question myself. And Sean, I did know, I think it was an email from you with some questions that I had seen at some point here in the construction phasing plan. Have we thought about that, and we're going to be submitting something on construction phasing?
So we're going to be speaking with the church. Obviously, this has not gone to bid. There's no GC. We will look at ways to do phasing. We're always concerned about affecting means and methods of the contractor. But I do know that there was a question, so we will address it, and we'll come up with a way of illustrating how this can be kind of opened up in a way that you don't have the entire site open. That's something we want to ensure right off the bat, as one example would.
Yeah, and what I'm hoping for is just some general big picture things. So for example, we talked about your plan for how do you stage the septic system construction. Right, that there'll have to be some sort of a tight tank scenario while you're constructing the new system. So just something that sort of is a roadmap, not necessarily a full construction management plan, more of a roadmap or even a phasing sequence on a site plan or something like that, but something that gives a little bit of a roadmap.
One of the other things, I think there's been some concerns from a number of people in town boards and committees and townspeople asking too about if you have a site and you're worried about erosion and control of that nature. One of the other permits that will be required by the contractor, will be the site operator, is to do a SWIP, a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which will go through the USP EPA, because we got to disturb more than an acre, and that will be submitted. Conservation will ask for that. That's something that then there'll be another set of eyes watching over anything to ensure that you're not having an erosion control to protect any erosion, not just to wetlands, but just leaving the site from construction. You're required to do that whether you're next to wetlands or not.
I agree with Sean that, big picture is really what I think we'd be looking for. I work for GC. I wouldn't be expecting you to control exactly what my company might be doing.
Sure.
If we don't do this kind of work, but yeah, I understand your comments are well placed, relative to not controlling the means and methods. But the big picture items, I think, is absolutely important to understand at this juncture. But, good.
And it could be an either or also, but just to understand that there's going to be a certain phasing in how you're going to do things in a certain order, and you can do things a few different ways, but you have to have an order to.
And remember, it's a plan. Plans change. So
absolutely.
Good. Appreciate that. Other comments, questions, concerns? This juncture? Yes.
There's actually one more topic that we'd like to touch on. At the last meeting, our landscape architect did not have the lighting plan available to touch on, and I believe she is on Zoom this evening and has some resources that we'd like to share your allowance to.
Yeah, I would absolutely be willing to entertain that. And who are we looking for to elevate?
Rebecca Bouchon.
Rebecca Bouchon, I see that she's in the attendee list. So, Ms. Bouchon, welcome. Or are you with us, Ms. Bouchon?
Yes, sorry, that took a second. I'm here. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm not there in person, but I think my role is pretty limited. We're going to try to keep it just to this cute lighting plan we've got going. So I think that someone there has a slide, or do you need me to share it? There we go. Perfect. So we just want to give you a look at what we're proposing for the style. We will be getting a photometrics plan from the lighting manufacturer for our next meeting. We could probably submit it offline for you as well in the interim. But this is the style of the lighting we're proposing. Right now, there are some kind of shoebox fixtures, just really standard fixtures out in the existing parking lot behind the rectory. And there are some bollards around the church parcel. And right now it doesn't look like we need to replace those, but just anticipating the pole lights definitely need to come down. So that's why we're showing these pole fixtures. And we're suggesting this Ashbury fixture from Landscape Forms because it's somewhere in between traditional and modern looking. It's kind of clean lines. It gives a nice pedestrian scale light fixture with the pole heights. They'd be 14 to 16 feet tall. We're finalizing that with the designer, and the bollards, if they need to be replaced, this line has a matching bollard, it has a matching wall light, so we can really cover all the bases and keep a continuous look around the site. They're all dark sky compliant. They're actually Build America compliant, and then we would only have at the kind of perimeter doors facing Windy Hill Lane and Route 30, just emergency lighting kind of at those doors only. So like these wall mount fixtures we're showing, they would really just be on the other two sides where the main entrance and the other side, in case there's any gaps that we can't cover with the poles. And then there'll be, from the architect's perspective, under the canopy at the main entrance, there'll be some recessed lighting that just shines down on that walkway. So these poles, for the most part, will be in the back area of the new parking lots, unless we have to replace any of the existing at the front main entrance drive.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Questions, comments relative to lighting from the board?
Will these light fixtures be designated on the site plan or either the site or the landscape plan, just where they're located? Yes.
Yes, so that's I've added them to my plan and then sent it off for the light level study where they put the little numbers on the grid. I can't do that, so the lighting people will do that and we'll bring it back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Other comments, concerns relative to lighting? Yes, sir.
Sorry, David Chamoy, Windy Hill Lane. Just a question, well, maybe it's a comment. I'm assuming that there is no lighting along the emergency access roadway on the back of the building. And that is completely dark. Is that in fact the case?
Well, I think what I just heard, and I'll certainly let the applicant speak for themselves, but I think what I just heard is only the required emergency lightings around the entrances, doorways is going to be there. I don't think there's any planned lighting beyond what is absolutely required for emergency purposes. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there aren't any egress doors on that back side facing Windy Hill. Like the doors on that side go into the courtyard. So the closest doors wouldn't have any. So unless the fire department for some reason came back and said we needed some sort of light, we're not showing anything there right now.
Okay. And Mr. Building Commissioner.
Yes, I just want to, put them at ease that that lighting will only be for egress and for the egress doors, of course. And that standard is 11 lux, which is only like 2 candles, which in the LED lighting might be a little bit brighter, but it also is quite dim. Similar to the lights that you have like in the hallway that come on as you walk through the hallway here. That's the same 11 lux that you would have.
Okay. Hopefully that's helpful. Good. I do see Ms. Plum, do you have another comment?
There.
Right.
Hi, again, Carol Plum. Also have the same question related to lighting in the vernal pools. We were able to do this at the Loker Conservation Recreation Area. It's supposed to go into the maintenance and operations manual that during the time around the big night that they make sure that the lights are not on while the amphibians, assuming there's anything left, are still migrating. So can that be something that people consider and put into your operations manual?
Thank you, Ms. Plum. And I don't know if Eve is prepared to address that.
Not prepared to address it tonight.
Okay, but you certainly get the comment.
We'll look at it as part of our analysis too, to make sure that there aren't any light pollution impacts to the buffer zone around the vernal pool.
Okay.
And just keep in mind that there is a huge portion of undisturbed area around the vernal pool. So U.S. Army Corps regulations typically limit you to impacting 25% of the upland area around the vernal pool. The cool thing about a vernal pool is the vernal pool is just kind of where they breed. So they live in the upland around the vernal pool. So what people sort of don't understand is that the vernal pool is not where the species live, the obligate species, but they need the upland around it. So that's why the Army Corps has restrictions where you can protect the vernal pool all you want. If you disturb all the water that goes to it, or if you disturb all the upland around it, you've effectively eliminated the habitat. So they do have a limit of about 25% of the total area around the vernal pool. I think it's like 250 feet from the edge of the pool, that you want to make sure that that's maintained. We'll look at that. We'll look at where the vernal pool is, and then make sure that we're staying under that 25%.
Thank you. Okay. Wonderful. Other comments, concerns? All right. Any other topics that the applicant wants to address? Okay. Wonderful. Ms. Quiswell, I'll just ask town council here, any other issues that we should be addressing beyond, obviously scheduling for, our next hearing, which I don't believe we have an official date for another hearing.
No, we are still, I'm sorry, Amy Questle, Town Council. We are still, waiting on, Sean's, formal letter, which we would then go through. We did, Mr. Chairman, we did discuss, June 28th. June 28th.
Yeah.
At our very first hearing on June 1st. I don't know if that matters now, but.
Well, let's just kind of back into, I believe what I've been hearing from the applicant is perhaps that we're expecting some submissions, revised plans and revised submissions to coming in sometime early next week. And assuming that occurs, Mr. Peer Reviewer, what do you think, what would you anticipate the timing that you would need?
Amy will attest to this. I don't commit to anything until the materials are submitted. Because too often they don't come in and people remember
For
that.
planning purposes,
How much time?
At least a week.
At least a week, okay, well, that's helpful, okay. That's certainly better than no commitment. I just we need to put a stake in the ground in order to understand, how far out would be helpful or not helpful. I mean, it sounds like if I try to schedule something for, next week, it's probably not helpful to further the conversation if we're really not getting what we need, which is in large part what you can provide.
Right, but I would suggest that the hearing, regardless of whether you have my comments on the revised submittal or not, an opportunity for them to present the revised submittal is important. So if they can have a revised submittal by the 28th, I would suggest that you keep the 28th, and then at a minimum, they present all of the changes and the new landscape of submittals, which will include the lighting plan.
Oh, but we want to do so much more by then, right?
I'll be there, the letter for me is sort of, it's almost a legal document because it forecasts a conditions list based on it. So I can freely provide my comments. The written comments will take a little bit more time because they have to be well written and well thought, unlike some of my comments.
You come highly recommended. So. Utmost confidence.
But I'm comfortable that within 2 weeks I'll have a letter, absolutely. But I'll do my best to turn it around.
It's going to make sense for us to schedule 2 dates now. We have the 28th in the schedule, 1 day beyond that.
I would think so. I would think that would be. Manny, when's our next natural? July 11th. So we want to stay off that day. Does the 28th still work? For everybody on the board? Is there anybody on the board that's here that it does not work from?
Still works.
Okay. The 28th work for the applicant? It's easy.
Yeah, Rebecca Stamisi, 14 Winthrop Road. I'm hearing that the plans are coming in and it's a good idea to see it beforehand. Doesn't it make sense if the plans are here next week to present to the board so that everybody can see the revised plans while then Sean gets his report in for the 28th? Is that possible to meet next week just to present the plans? And then also I would suggest that just because, as you can sense, there are a lot of people who want to comment. And so ultimately, when do you want them to comment? And next week might be a good time to do that as well. So, you sort of, it's been very targeted to very specific things, but there are a lot of people who do want to comment. So
you're talking about comments generally.
General comments. So, now that all the information is there, so, can you review the plan? The entire board can see it. People can also come comment while Sean does his report for the 28th, just because you're going to be bumping up against the 4th of July and then, all the other stuff. So I would just suggest that.
I appreciate that. Appreciate the comments there. And certainly I would be willing to hear other people's comments tonight, regardless of the topic. So, I don't want to waste this hearing time as well. If there were other comments that members of the public wanted to discuss or comment on. So certainly But, you know, I'm not opposed to that. Let me see, let's take a look at the calendar.
Hey, sorry, excuse one thing, I want to just speak that Monday, I just realizing Monday is a holiday, and it might be more to middle to later in the week that we have a submission in. I mean, an extra day, but just in general.
I'll expect it on the 27th.
It will be well
I've
before.
been through these a lot.
He'll be next week, Sean. I am sure of Mr. Peer Reviewer.
You understand this?
At least with not the landscape. I don't know what she's gonna do with the. But I can't promise for her.
Not that I'm suggesting Fridays, but Fridays are off the table, right? Okay, good. I'm not available on the 22nd. The only day for me really, for me to be available would be the 21st for next week. Sounds like it's too soon. Which sounds like it's too soon.
Yeah, without question.
Without question.
Here's what I'd suggest is it's good practice to give the applicant enough time to prepare a good submittal. Because I'd rather have an extra week taken and a clearer submittal and a more coordinated submittal be provided.
Yeah, I mean, I'd prefer, you know, if we're looking at my schedule opens up a little bit. It's not good, but it opens up a little bit for that last week of June, even if we slid 28th to the 27th. For, I don't know what that looks like for people, for more of a presentation from the applicant and taking comments and just really getting the table set with something, I don't know, you know, I could do the 29th as well that week, but that might be too soon for you as peer reviewer.
Everything is predicated on when the submittal comes in and that all the other.
Okay.
Everything.
I'm fine.
Josh, may I make a recommendation, Josh?
Mr. Hirsch, you always may make a recommendation.
It sounds like the 28th seems to work for everybody at the moment. Why don't we get a feeling on how things are progressing next week? And if we need to make an early decision the week after, we can take it on an ad hoc basis as needed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what people are even available during the week of the 4th.
I am not available the week of the 4th.
Yeah, that's what I think that's a tall order to ask people.
Yeah.
You're out of the way.
Tuesday, right?
It is Tuesday, but thankfully, I think a lot of people.
Midweek, right?
Okay.
So Mr. Chairman, would it make sense just while we're all here to see about July 10th or July 11th?
Well, July 11th, we have
Oh, that's your regular, that's right.
that is our regular scheduled meeting, and I think you would agree that we're probably do not want to intermingle a regular scheduled meeting with
I agree.
with this matter. Okay. Yeah.
July 13th.
So maybe the 13th?
The 13th is a possibility for me as well. Yeah. So let's, I think we need first and foremost, just concurrence for the 28th, because I don't think we've actually set that. We'll need to continue the hearing to the 28th at the very least. And then we'll, Manny be also looking to set up here for the 13th, July 13th as well.
Question on the 28th. So if the report comes in, or the revised drawings come in next week, is the 28th with Sean's? And I know he doesn't want to answer that, but is that?
No, I won't have it ready, but there's no scenario where I'll have a comment better ready, but.
Okay, so you need more than a week. Because if it's coming in.
Again,
He's non-committal.
What I've seen today, I'd prefer to wait to see when the applicant submits their material and the quality of the submission, because it's everything I do is predicated on it. So if I find that they didn't address a bunch of stuff and that a bunch of lines are wrong and that they don't have a lighting plan, and then everything is, again, it's another 2 pages of comments I have to write. So I would just focus on getting a document package from the applicant, and then I will commit to turning it around as quick as I possibly can. But the 28th is, we're 12 days away from the 28th. I would be shocked if they're able to get a package in by the 28th. So we'll see. Because I need stormwater design, everything backing up everything has to come with it. Because these documents form the basis of your decision. They provide all the documentation that you approve and sets the expectations going forward. It has to be complete, and it has to be clean, and it has to be accurate, and it has to be well supported. So everything we do to push it early, if it comes at a cost of the quality of their submission, the completeness of their submission, kind of undoes the objective, which is to get to a point where you can make a decision.
Great.
I mean, I think we're very close. I think they have all the information they need. Now it's just a matter of packaging it in a very compelling, complete way so that you guys can do your job.
Well, we certainly have the 28th. We'll maintain the 28th. I don't think it makes sense trying to schedule anything before the 28th for certain. So let's just at least establish the continuation if we could. And you have concurrence from the applicant.
That's correct.
Wonderful. I would move that we continue this hearing to June 28th at 7:05.
Seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. We'll take it by roll call vote. Mr. Hirsch?
Aye.
Mr. Grumbuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Ms. Janice?
Aye.
Mr. Sarian? Aye. Mr. Levine? Aye. Mr. White?
Aye.
And myself, the chair, Joshua Warnig. Aye. The ayes have it. We will continue this hearing to the 28th. The intent also, let's get on the schedule, Manny, for the July 13th. And of course, 7:05 p.m.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
You may.
And I'm addressing this to town council. Amy, how many more meetings do you think we are likely to have on this after the 28th?
So, I hate to sound like Sean, but it all depends on the submittals that we get. If we get, I think that the way that the board has done this is really good. That, we've already heard from Sean tonight. And so I think when he gets the plans that he gets, we're going to get a very comprehensive peer review from Sean with a list of conditions that he's going to recommend that I am going to incorporate into the decision. So depending on the 28th, we might need just one meeting after that, possibly two. But it all, again, unfortunately, I can't really answer your question, Mr. Grumbach, because it does depend on what the applicant submits and how comprehensive that is.
Quite right. The process is the process, and we have to take it as it comes.
Thank you.
Absolutely agree with town council that there's just simply no way to predict at this juncture. Even less committal than Mr. Peer Reviewer. So. All right.
Aida has a question.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. I am wondering if I missed a submission or if there's something coming up about police and fire weighing in on this proposal. And I'm asking because there have been with our past 40Bs. And again, I'm not sure if there was something that I missed seeing, and so I'm asking about it. And there was a mention that the fire department had looked at the site and was preferring a separate exit for emergencies, separate curb cut for emergencies. And was the only thing I've heard.
Is that typical and required?
So the plan is sent, the application is sent to police and fire. And I actually consider the police and fire review with the civil engineering review, because the fire department, the main review that they do is the truck turning radius. And, they make sure that the interior parking, if it's one way, they don't like one way, that kind of thing. Right. And same with the police, they're usually incorporated with the traffic. And so when the final plans, or when the revised plans come in, we can send them right over to them and just ask for them to take a look. And then if Sean has any major concerns with police or fire, he usually reaches out to them himself during his peer review, and will ask the fire chief if that turn is okay with them. So that can still be done.
Okay, and I recall that the fire department had weighed in on evacuating people if needed with stretchers, and whether elevators were large enough, and whether there was enough access for water if in the case of a fire, and hooking up a hose to hydrants. And I don't at the moment remember anything about police other than traffic. That's true. And there is no manager's office on site at this location, is that right?
There is a manager's office.
There is. Later.
Oh, then I misheard it earlier. Okay, thank you.
All right. Excellent. Other comments, questions, concerns? All right, well, hearing none, we have continued the hearing. So at this time, I think we just have the paperwork to sign, and I'll countersign for that continuation. We will see everyone who wants to be seen on the 28th. Look forward to that, and everybody have a wonderful night there. Now,
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.
Is that's where you're going, Manny? All right. Thank you, Mr. Grumback, for the motion, and Mr. Hirsch, I can always rely on you for the second. We'll take that by roll call vote. Mr. Hirsch?
Aye.
Mr. Grumback?
Aye.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Ms. Janice?
Aye.
Mr. Sarian?
Aye.
Mr. Levine? Aye. Mr. White? Aye. Myself, the chair, Joshua Warnick, aye. So adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful night, and thank you for your time.